I want to welcome you to the 2012 ICP here in Cape Town, and I want to thank you for agreeing to this interview. We're doing it for a project, part of the UNISA project, People Behind the Papers, and what it is all about is we interview successful academics in the field just to find out a little bit more about them and their stories, who they are, and their journey to which led them to where they are today.
Okay.
Yeah, so just as a start, maybe if you can just give us a little bit of background in terms of who you are.
Okay, well, I am, as you said, Katina van Schalkwyk. I love to always say I'm African. So if people ask me and then they say African, then I say yes, because Africa does not only consist of black people. So that's usually a good starting point. I do believe that I am firmly African because my family's been in South Africa for more than 10 generations. So that makes me belong here, nowhere else. But I have studied at the University of Pretoria.
Okay.
From my first degree through to my final degree. I actually started out in music, but then later was much more interested in how music impacts people's behavior, and then moved on to study psychology and did my PhD in psychology, but on a systems paradigm for music psychology, trying to explain the person-music interactive system in that way. But at University of Pretoria, I was also very strongly involved in curriculum development, in program planning, and my teaching was mostly in developmental psychology and personality, which is still my focus in different, where I'm teaching now. So in 2003, I got the opportunity to move to the University of Macau in China. Macau is a small peninsula in the southwest coast of China, on the Pearl River Delta. It's about 65 kilometers south of Hong Kong. It's a very small little territory, but it was under Portuguese rule for 450 years. And you can very clearly see the remnants of Portuguese colonialism in Macau, as opposed to the British colonialism in Hong Kong. So something that is for me very interesting conflict to see that. In 1999, 2 years after Hong Kong, Macau was then kind of reunited or reintegrated with the People's Republic of China, the main China mainland. So it is now called a special administrative region, and special administrative regions usually function as a what they call one country, two systems policy. So they have the mainland main policies, but they are allowed to have their own foreign engagement, their own legal system and administrative system. Macau also is what is widely known as the Las Vegas of the East.
That's interesting.
So that being said, the approximately 29 square kilometers houses 34 casinos.
Wow.
So we are really overwhelmed by casinos. In 2004, they opened up the licenses, which was previously dominated by one group. Now also have 3 other groups, international licenses, which now give us, for example, the Venetian as being the largest casino complex in the world. It's large, it's 5 times larger than the Venetian in Las Vegas. Different to Las Vegas, however, is that in Macau, you cannot move to the suburbs away from the Golden Mile. You are always in the face of a casino. Whether you wake up, whether you go to school, whether you go to work, you will always pass a casino, some way or another, because there are just so many.
Yeah.
So that brings it. The benefit part of that is that Macau is maybe the richest city-state in the world, in the sense that it averages growth rate, double-digit growth rate, and at some point actually came up to 29% of growth rate, annual growth rate. So the 85% of the government revenue comes from gambling taxes, and the city has, not as far as I know, ever been in the red with the deficit, because they cannot spend all the money they have. So we are fortunate in Macau to have very solid financial system, or economic system, that provides. The unemployment rate is down to 3.2%.
A little bit different than South Africa.
Yes, yes. So in that sense, is that it's very different. The whole environment, the university. There are several universities in Macau. The University of Macau, however, is the main public university. It is government funded, therefore it has fairly good funding for research and expansion. The university also, in terms of its credibility, is very highly ranked within the South China area, because it is because of a very strong drive towards research output. So it's not only teaching, it's also research output. So we have, and we as a university, we teach in English, which obviously makes it possible for me to teach there. What was I going to say? We have a very wide range of international scholars from Europe, from other Asian countries, from America, South America, Australia are the main contributors.
Okay, so that's quite a whole mouthful. Now I want to track back a little bit. You mentioned that you studied at the University of Pretoria. Did you grow up in Pretoria?
Yes, I actually did.
So you born and bred.
Except for a few years in my early childhood that I spent in the then known Petersburg. I think it's got a new name now.
Polokwane. Things have changed. So how did you get into music? Was it since childhood? Was it influenced by your family?
Yes, I did music as a child. Like most of us start learning music at school. In my secondary school, I did it as part of my subjects for matriculation. And then in those days, when I graduated from high school, there was still a very wide discrimination between male-female. What kind of jobs were considered appropriate for females? So the most appropriate jobs for females were, of course, teaching and nursing. So I wasn't really interested in nursing. Teaching, I wasn't really interested in teaching, but okay, let me go into the music teaching, because it was also explained the benefits is that you can, once you're a parent, you can do it from home. Yes. So that kind of thing, which is true. And I mean, for a long time I did teach music at home, piano and cello and recorder.
Wow, so you played quite a few instruments. Yeah. Only those three?
Those three were the three that I could teach in. So the others I didn't really have enough expertise to teach it.
So you finished your degree in music, and then what happened after that?
After that, I became a professional parent. And I like to call it professional parenting because I had 4 kids in 4 years' time, so they were very close together, and demanded a lot of me. input, and I believed that I was giving them the time and the energy to build them up for the future, so that they can become productive citizens of the town. But when my youngest child reached kindergarten age, they all went to kindergarten for 1 year, I decided I want to now kind of develop a career path beyond parenting, and that took me to psychology.
Okay, this is my favorite question. As a psychology student myself, I am always curious to ask, why psychology?
Well, for me, the why psychology was specifically because I was interested in how does music affect or influence people on the secondary level, and the what I call the secondary benefits of music. Only a very small proportion of people can become virtuoso pianists or perform on the world market, publicly perform. But a very large percentage of us can learn it. It's like, I often compare it with the analogy to driving a car. We can all learn how to drive a car, but we're not all racetrack drivers.
Yes.
And that's the same. And then there are also those group of people that are almost natural musicians in that they can play without ever having had any training. So that is also part of my thoughts. So what are the secondary advantages? How does music interact with your everyday life and with your work life? What are the benefits? Why do you study music? Apart from becoming a pianist, and things like behavior changes, self-concept, even the brain developments. We know
they're
that
still not ready. This will be a very busy. Dr. Marimba, it's been my experience is that
we all know from research today that the fetus already hears sounds from 20 weeks in the womb. So after gestation, so all of this is what is the effect? We also know that the brain development is very much stimulated by listening to certain kinds of music as opposed to others. Music is a universal language. Music is something that brings us together and draws us apart. And so that was my main reason why I wanted to go into psychology, because psychology is the study of human behavior and the study of how these different aspects interrelate to make us who we are.
So, from what you've been saying, you went into music because of the context you were in at that time.
Yeah.
Was the most appropriate thing of your choices that you had, music teaching. So, by heart, you were a teacher interested in music, and then you said you studied psychology. Did you do a full-time degree? Or?
No, I was fortunate to, I could do the first 3 years. At that time it was a 3-year plus the honors. So I could do the 3-year psychology, the major part, in 1 year. So I did self-study for I think the first and the second year courses, and I did attended class for the 3rd year classes. It's a little story. The very first class that I walked into was the statistics class. And I come from school with a very difficulty in mathematics.
And you were quite mature at that time.
Yes, I was mature. I was over 30 by that time, 36. So I was still very hesitant. You have that foreknowledge that mathematics is not my bet. But here I walk into Peter Laray's statistics class, and the very first thing I had to study in psychology is statistics.
And that didn't make you run.
And I actually did not register until I finished the first midterm test. And I actually passed it. And then I decided, okay, now if I can pass that, I can pass the rest. The rest is easy. It's like studies. So, and I did eventually my honors course, when I continued now with the research methodology and the in statistics, I ended up doing pretty well. And that is when I also studied psychometrics, psychological assessment, and we actually did these tests on ourselves. And I discovered that there's no real big difference between my verbal and non-verbal. So all these years that I didn't do well in numbers were basically because
Mental block.
a mental block.
Or maybe society's
But in the end, I still prefer qualitative research,
Yeah.
because I like the stories much more, and I can hear much more of the individual's own stories than to always look at numbers. A person is not a number in my mind, and therefore working with numbers is not my favorite.
Okay.
I prefer the qualitative research.
And then in terms of your masters, can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
My master's, I did initially apply for the research master's, but maybe in good scores did not get in because I was a single parent at that time. My children's father died very young, and then it would have demanded time out from me that I could not have, and I could not stop working. I was working at the university at the time as a lecturer. And given all the circumstantial issues, it was maybe the best for the best. But I then did my academic master's, looking into the impact of music, the influence of music on the productivity of office workers.
Okay.
And it was a phenomenological study with Rex van Vliet. So I did that while I was working at the University of Pretoria, as I say, and then I continued at the same university with my PhD.
Were you working in the Department of Psychology?
Yeah, in the Department of Psychology.
Okay. And you were teaching?
I was teaching personality theories and developmental psychology. Occasionally did an intro class. I did a biological psych class. But eventually focused on personality and developmental side.
So was that an option for you, or were you just kind of, this is what we have available, the personality and developmental psychology? Was it interesting?
It is always an interest. The developmental psychology has always been for me interesting. Is how do we develop? How do our circumstances? How do all these multitude of influences. Culturally, I was just listening earlier on to Silver Rising's presidential address, and I mean, from the ecosystemic perspective, the person is not an island, and there's so much that goes in. And in a sense, for me, raising my children, being a parent, was like having a laboratory at home, and I could go through all the phases and understand that. Personality had the other dimension of development, because as we grow, our personalities evolve. For me, that the two things go hand in hand, the two courses. So, and at the time when I was lecturing there was a need for somebody with personality. I don't remember actually who was teaching developmental, because it came very early on that I started teaching developmental. I think it was some other people who just left and I stepped in, or people moved on to teach graduate and I stepped in. So I really cannot remember that in detail. But those were my two favorites. I mean, I did, as I say, I did the biological side course, which was a big challenge because having done all my schooling in Afrikaans, I was confronted with teaching biological psychology in English, and to explain all those neuropsych terms in English took me quite a while to study them again. But in the end, I discovered that actually I do know more than the students, so that's okay. But teaching at university has always been for me a great stimulating experience, and to a large extent I think keeps me young, because I do like to interact with young people. I have a real passion for the students, and this eventually comes through in how they learn from him.
So you can't say you're from Macau.
Yes, I'm from Macau.
And you mentioned that you're involved there at the University of
Yes.
Macau. So can you backtrack and take us through how did you end up in Macau with the project that you are involved in?
Yes, I attended a conference in 2002 in Baden-Baden in Germany, which is a conference on systems theory and cybernetics, where I was at that time presenting on my music research, because that was there I studied the systems theory and cybernetics. So I met with somebody there who was then from Macau and saying they're starting up a program, would I be interested? I can still remember my saying this, yes, I would be. That's kind of who I said. So then I got back, that was around August, beginning of August 2002, got back, thought a lot about it.
So it was very uncertain, yes.
Yeah, it was kind of, maybe. I rarely say yes if I'm not sure why my yes is yes, or no if I don't have a good reason why I'm saying no. So maybe it's a good way to think, to leave you space to think about it. So I was thinking, I was at a time at Pretoria University where I felt as that I was so overwhelmed as coordinator of the undergraduate and honors courses that I just didn't have time for research.
Okay.
So I felt very, in a sense, stifled. And this was an opportunity to go to a much smaller university where I could change track. So after much thought, also considering at the time my youngest child was approaching the end of his first degree. So I was basically in a space where I love to give this reason as saying is that before the children left the nest and I would experience the empty nest, I decided to fly out. So the eagle flies out and leaves the chicks to get on their own. So so this opportunity came along and I got the job, so I left for Macau in September 2003.
And how was that experience for you, leaving your children? Are they still based in?
No, my children at that time, two were studying at Stellenbosch in their master's degrees, and the other two was finishing their degrees at Pretoria University. So basically two was already out.
Okay.
They were already thinking about their future, where they would work. I did tell them early on is that I will support them until about 23, and then I think they should start supporting themselves. So their doors were opening for them, and I had a very big house in Pretoria, which I thought is living alone in this big space is not my idea of the future. So I went with anticipation. Obviously, there's always the negative people around you that tell you all the horror stories about China.
Stories did they tell you?
One of the horror stories was, oh, the Chinese eat fetuses. Now
it's dogs.
oh, it's dog. The dog is Korean. Eventually, what I did was to read and study a little bit about the stories from that. And I read a very good book by, what's her name now? There's Wild Swans is the name of the book.
Okay.
I can't remember the author's name. It turned out that she and I was born in the same year, so it really made me very connected with this. It really resonated. And then, as she went through how she was writing about her grandmother, her mother, and herself. So it was kind of a 100-year story about how her grandmother already changed the way that she was perceived. But then it was very interesting when you could see obviously when she was doing this age, I was the same age. I was doing this and she was doing that, and that kind of, as you say, resonated very much with me.
Yeah.
But from that I learned a lot about the stories of the people from China, which countered all these horror stories that people from here wanted to tell me. Obviously, some people didn't want me to go. My children was very excited for me because it was an opportunity.
So that was your main support. Would you say that
Yeah,
was your
yeah,
main support?
yeah. My children were my main support, but they're very open-minded in these things. I try to raise them very egalitarian and very critical and very interested in the world, instead of always just finding narrow pathways. So today, my two daughters are working in other countries in Africa. And my two sons are in South Africa. They're the two married ones. Can't live without a woman in their lives. But the girls, one is in Zambia and one is in Cameroon. That's one. So my children was growing up. They were supportive of this. My parents were also supportive. They were my other support system. The only thing that they required was that I should have a place to go and live. So I had to set up for accommodation before I left. And when I gave them that security, they were happy that things would be okay, which turned out serendipitously in another direction, because as I occupied the place, the person who left it was formerly at the University of Macau, who left for Hong Kong, and we met up and we are now married.
Oh
So
my
we
goodness,
became
it's so interesting how everything just works.
Yeah, so it was very interesting. We basically met for 5 minutes when he was handing over the keys and I took the keys.
Talk about the incident.
Yes, and then he went off to Hong Kong and I stayed in Macau, and about 3 months later he contacted me by email saying he's sailing to Macau, but I'd be interested in dinner. We've been together since 2004.
Oh my goodness, interesting. And then the project at Macau.
So at Macau I started out pyramid teaching, getting to know the environment. Moving into such a culturally diverse or different environment does require you a little time to just getting to know it. It is still, I still don't speak the language because I never needed to learn the
What
language.
language do
They
you
speak Chinese, the Cantonese dialect, which is not the main dialect, it's Mandarin. They speak Cantonese, which is a little more difficult actually to learn than Mandarin. But because I was not immersed in a context where I couldn't get anything done without. So the first year, 2 years really took me to just adjust, adapt. I initially went on an 18-month sabbatical from Pretoria University and 6 months unpaid leave, because I also did want to kind of keep my options open. If I did not adjust, if I could not really adapt to this environment, then I didn't have somewhere to come back to. Which was obviously also security for my family, because they knew that there was a back door open if the front door closed on me. Then I did find, after the first 2 years, I adapted, I adjusted, mostly because I'm very positive and I really looked for similarities rather than for differences. I really looked for trying to learn as much as I could, and through that I found that I could fit in much easier. I think if one always looks for the things that you don't like about a place, you will never be able to really enjoy it, because you're always looking for something to criticize. And that's not my life philosophy, so I don't look for what I can criticize, I look for what I can appreciate.
So, having said that, what were the challenges that you faced, that you had to say, okay, wait, this is a challenge, how can I turn this into something positive?
The first of the challenges was just getting to know where all the conveniences and the services are that one needs, like a medical practitioner, shops, dental, just the basic necessities. That was the first challenge. Initially it was a little more challenging to communicate in the sense that how can you achieve. But then the students at the university were all very good enough in English so that they could benefit from learning and they could use the stories. The more I learned about the culture, the more I learned how to, what questions to ask and what questions to avoid. It's quite a different spot. Just to look forward to okay, so then I also started learning about one thing. Because one, for example, very shortly after I arrived, my watch battery gave out, so I didn't have time. So I asked the student, where can I get a battery for my watch? And they would look at me and then later on I realized that actually they know where I can get it, but they don't know how to say that in English because they have enough English to function academically, but they don't have enough English for lifestyle things. And so that kind of little things that I learned over time. So challenges, other than that, life is a challenge, and I really can't pinpoint and say this was more difficult than that.
But that is quite interesting because, if I'm not mistaken, you presenting at the ICP, and the title is The Utility of the Collage Life Story Dictation Technique. And
it's the collage life story elicitation technique. What I enjoy doing is to integrate research into my teaching. So early on when I was trying to find an innovative project for the students to do with adolescents, I remembered that at Pretoria University I supervised students on the ZMET, the Zaltman metaphor elicitation technique, which we adapted for 2 different projects here. And I thought as well, how can I adapt that into becoming a tool that I can use as a project for the students? So I adapted it and called it Collage Life Story Elicitation because I'm also very intrigued in life stories, narratives. That is for me one of the very first projects that I conducted there was on narrative identities of women and adolescents. So I developed the technique and I kind of explained to the students and they executed it because then they could do it in their native language because narratives are best done in the language that you are comfortable in. So they did the studies, then they could do the literature review and so forth. And gradually that evolved into becoming a very solid tool that I now have a kind of written and published about and just completed a book chapter that will come out in the Handbook for School-Based Family Counseling later, most likely early next year, later this year or early next year.
Will we be able to find it in bookstores?
I hope so, because it is a very useful, the technique is very useful, but the whole concept of school-based family counseling is also very useful in developing environments where it's difficult to access your population for psychological services. So eventually I became involved with the school-based family counseling symposium, which focuses on this kind of, where the model is looking at the child in context, but also with this bigger context of the family and the school and how these interact in the development of the child. So you see some of my development
I'm in my office in 10 minutes. I'm just coming out of a meeting.
Involves the development of the individual, of the child, within the family context, and all of these are my interests.
I can really see from this interview how you started everything that happened in your life, even the way you spoke about. I could see that interest in narratives and stories coming through, which brought you where you are with what you. So you designed this collage, life story dictation technique. Elicitation.
Yeah. So it's a technique that I designed, and I have now refined the analytical procedures as well, so that there's different codes that you look for. And it's a very relationship-oriented approach. So when you look at the different components, it starts off with making a collage and then telling stories about the images, and then 3 other steps that come to my presentation.
Yeah,
and then that leads to then analyzing that in terms of the proximity of how people place the images, and how they also talk about it, the congruence between the non-verbal and the verbal stories, and how this comes together into telling us, explicating some of the underlying issues that people are.
This is interesting. I've never heard of this technique personally, but has it been widely used and applied in the South African context?
No, not very widely, but I have done a small study at a school in Witbank.
Yes.
I don't know what Witbank is called.
Still Witbank.
Thank you, Witbank. And a small study in Gaborone.
Yeah.
I had, at the time when I was doing this with different cultures, kids, had difficulty finding collaborators. So the minute I can get some collaborators, I can spread it as widely as possible in South Africa, because I think it's a very useful tool. There is one, particularly for children in a more urbanized environment. It's all good and well to have children work with clay and beads and toys from nature if they are rural. The children in urban areas don't have access to those kind of things. So this makes use of everyday magazines. So you just collect all your local magazines, children and adult, except you don't have the adult magazines, lifestyle magazines. And they make collage clippings.
So it's a very cultural relative technique by the looks of it.
Yeah.
And the sound.
It is very easily adaptable to the culture in which you do it,
Yeah.
because you use the tools from that culture, or the magazines from that culture.
Yes.
So for my Chinese samples, I had them use Chinese, with Chinese writing. The children there are much more into cartoon magazines, so I would use those kind of things. So the research, it's also quite robust that field workers who does this for the first time,
Yes.
the first time interviewers like yourself, can very easily do it because it's semi-structured. You don't need to have expertise interviewing skills, but you can adjust it. You do get a little training about how to do it. If you can also follow the procedures very closely. You do sorry, it doesn't matter who the field workers are. I do it with my students.
I truly hope that the people who watch this will be encouraged to utilize and use this technique within the South African context. By the sound of it,
Well, I can assure you it would have great benefits of executing here.
And in terms of the future, can you just briefly, where are you heading, or you just,
Well, I am still moving on with this particular technique that I've developed. My first next step is to devise a fairly solid theoretical base for this. At present, it's kind of grabs onto theories that are existing, but to give it a solid theoretical foundation. So that's the one idea, and then my PhD students are using this in their research to further confirm the utility of the technique. I'm also implementing it now with adults to see how adults respond. And then I want to implement it specifically with the whole family to see. I have done the beginning with the family, but not fully the way that I want to do it with the family. So I'm actually moving with this technique and the school-based family counseling and see how I can take this into Macau and Southeast China, because that is the way that we can access our populations for psychological services. Trying to give the adults the resistance, the stigmatization, the help-seeking behavior is just not there. So working through children is a way to get the parents.
And even the parents who can utilize those, as you said, you
Yes,
explain
they can
this
do
to
it.
parents, and within any context, as it, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, in any context. And you just need magazines, some paper and glue and scissors, and a tape recorder. I have not done video recording, although we wanted to do video recording with children with autism, but we couldn't get at the time, the study that we did with families living with autism, the child was too young.
Thank you, sir.
But we hope to do it with older children and see how they can express some of their stories, particularly the non-verbal part, and then do the video recording so that you can also get the non-verbal behaviors that accompany it. And I've had one child in one of the studies that the students did that was very disturbed. It's a single parent child. He refused to paste more than one picture on the collage. They were always required to do about 12. And the stories just oozed from all the distress that this child is experiencing, lack of attachment, avoidance attachment, anxieties and things. So it reveals a lot of the underlying issues that a counselor can then follow through.
So the collage life story elicitation technique, okay, I'm very fascinated now from hearing about it. Can you maybe, where can we read, can we get articles
The
online?
one article that is published is in the Qualitative Report,
Okay.
2010.
Yeah.
There is a study that I did with Adolescents.
Did you manage to deal with that gentleman?
And the keywords we can
Well,
use
they're
is
having
collage
a
life story
Yeah.
elicitation
Oh, right.
and Katina van Skalpe.
Yes.
Okay, Katina, thank you so much. It was a fascinating interview and a pleasure. And I hope you all the best for the future and safe trip back to Macau. And I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the stay in South Africa.
Yes.
Are you planning a little holiday after
Yes,
the
I will be
conference?
visiting with my family next week.
Okay.
My one son lives here in Cape Town.
Fantastic.
So I'll do that. And my dad and my other son and granddaughter, I now have one granddaughter.
Okay.
And then maybe just a quick overnight at Gaborone. Fortunately, air flights is now, travel is now easy to do.
Well, all the best for you and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and it was a great pleasure.